Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. You're here with Helen Tarrant, and I'm here just walking along the shops in Chatswood, in Willoughby, and I have this topic I want to talk to you about. Is should you be buying a property that is multi-tenanted or a property that has a single tenant? Which has more risk, and which one is more easier to manage, or which one is more of a hassle? And in the long term, what gets you better value? Should you be getting a property that's single, or should you be getting a property that has multiple tenants? Now, a lot of people traditionally think multiple tenant properties get you in terms of that sustainability, in terms of if one tenant leaves, you still have someone to pay the rent. In terms of, so you always have positive cash flow. But if you have a single tenant, if they leave, they end up with a huge gap, and therefore you don't actually have the sustainability in the income for that property. Now, is that correct? Absolutely, that is correct. But one of the things to look for is that if you do have multiple tenants, one of the things is that you're going to have more management costs. There is going to be cost in the long run in terms of refurbishing that property, because there's going to be more wear and tear on that property itself, and also because there's literally going to be lots of different items for you to fill. So in fact, there's going to be lots and lots of items for you to actually attend to in terms of maintenance. Whereas you have a large property, let's for example say if you have a large one tenant property, the tenant actually takes care of all of the outgoings, including probably taking care of the property itself. So that means that the tenant is actually going to be maybe mowing the lawn, and the tenant is going to pay for building insurance. The tenant is going to pay for just maybe given just the parking area, the total cleaning of the property. So they take care of it, absolutely everything in this property. Whereas if you had a tenant that was sharing the premise with someone else, so you had one warehouse that was split into two, or you're buying a strip of shops, what you find is that it will be the building insurance might be shared, or that they might be paying a higher gross rent, so that you have to pay a building insurance on top of that. There's management fees. Of course, management fee may be higher because all of a sudden managing 3 or 4 or 2 tenants rather than one tenant. And also you might need to have common area expenses such as electricity, cleaning of the toilets, taking care of the gardening. Whereas if you have one tenant, you don't have all of that. So they're all set and forget properties, but it's just one takes more maintenance than others. Also, you might find that the spaces, if you had a restaurant strip, the spaces are maybe potentially smaller, and so they cater for smaller business types. Where you do have a larger format property like a warehouse or a whole building, someone could take a whole floor, or they could take the whole of the premise. So in that sense, if you had a freestanding property with one tenant in there, it's easier for you to manage. It is also much easier for you to self-manage if you choose to self-manage it. However, when it does become vacant, it does leave a hole in your pocket, which means that if you had a dual tenant one with 2 tenants, or one with multiple tenants, you are actually going to be more secure in terms of the cash flow. Now also returns are different as well. So if you have a single tenant and it's a large tenant taking say 1,000 square meters of a warehouse or a whole building, you might find you might be able to get that at a better yield, because there's slightly higher risk that if they do leave, it's harder to replace them. If you buy a strip of shops, then you're going to find that you're paying a lower yield, so a higher price for that property, purely because there's more security. One tenant leaves, then you've got other tenants who's also going to support you and pay the mortgage and pay you positive cash flow. So therefore, when you look at the balance of probability, you're really again balancing the risk with the upside of that property as well. So ultimately, when it comes down to deciding what is the right commercial property for you, should you be getting a single tenanted property or should you be getting a multi-tenanted property, you've got to look at your current situation. Now, do you prefer something, do you want something that is set and forget, easy to self-manage, and something that is really just giving you a substantial lot of cash flow, and that you're going to put in buffers in place? So if you had a vacancy, you'll be able to have enough buffer in place until you get the next tenant. If that's the case, then buy a single tenant property and a freestanding property that later on you can always change and add value to if you wanted to. Or if you wanted the security and you really do need the income and you can't go without a vacancy, so you don't want a vacancy at all, one of the big ways to safeguard that is to get a multi-tenanted property. So if you do lose a tenant, you've got other tenants who are able to support the property, support the basic cash flow that is needed to pay the mortgage and the outgoings. And in that sense, you're only going to be out of pocket if you had a vacancy on the positive cash flow, so you can still sustain the mortgage repayment. So each and every one of your circumstances vary, and depending on your circumstance, a different type of property will work with you differently. So how do you decide finally? I mean, that is the big question, right? How do you decide which one to get? Well, one of the things you should look for in your portfolio is diversification. It's really important to look at diversification in your portfolio. And one of the ways to diversify is to actually get everything. So get something that is a one-tenant property, that is set and forget, and also buy something that is a dual tenant, so 2 tenants or 3 tenant property, so that you don't have a 6 or 8 tenants to start with, but you have something that's 2 or 3 tenants to start with, to just get you into the market so you understand what it's like to have multi-tenanted properties. So ultimately you can balance out your portfolio. And remember, balancing out a portfolio is long term. So it's not something you do tonight and tomorrow and then forget about it. It's actually buying one property this year and a different type of property next year, so you can continuously build on that portfolio. But if you need a more thorough analysis of whether you should buy a single tenant property or a multi-tenanted property, reach out to me at helentarrant.com or email me at helen@commercialpropertycashflow, and I'll be more than happy to go through a strategy with you. And in the meantime, hit the bell and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.